video, we're going to talk about parts of a circle. And so what I have for you here drawn is a circle already. And what I'm going to do to start this is I'm going to draw somewhere where I think is about the middle of the circle. And we're going to call this point P. Specifically though, point P is the center of the circle. And that's going to be very important for us as we go through all of the other types of parts of the circle. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of put another point on the edge of the circle, and we're going to call it B. And I'm just going to draw a line from P to B, and this might be recognizable to some of you as the radius. PB is the radius. And I'm going to add something that you may not have seen before. And what it is I'm going to draw a line over PB. And what that tells us is that it's a segment. It's a line segment. It connects P to B. And we call this the radius. And just to go off on that, another very important piece to our circle here, I'm going to add another point approximately there. It's not going to be entirely straight. And we will call this, say, actually, you know what, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to say this is A, and this is C, and then I'm going to draw a straight line here, which doesn't pass through the center, but it should. So here, we'll just draw it here. And this here, from A to C, we call this the diameter. A very, very important relationship between the radius and the diameter. We could say it is twice the radius's size. I'm just going to say twice the radius so that we all understand. And it passes through the center. Passes through center. Very important. Although I apologize for my crookedness of my line. The next thing that we're going to talk about that isn't really common but is still a part of a circle, and I'm going to do this in a different color here, as you saw, and I'm going to try my very best, oh that's not too bad, to get very close to the circle here. And we're going to put a little point here. We're going to call this E, we're going to call this F, and you know what, just because we're going to call this D. And what we can say here is EF is what we call is tangent. It's a line that touches the circle at one point. And that one point for us here is D, right? It touches it at point D. It's tangent. And what's really important that I actually should have added here is a tangent is a line that does go on forever. It's not a segment, but it can be a segment, but in this case I've put arrows on it. So when you have arrows, you should put arrows on the top here. So EF is tangent to the circle. Another thing that we are going to look at is kind of similar, I'm going to just pick another color here, is kind of similar to at the diameter. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw 2 points, or I'm going to draw a straight line here, and I'm going to draw 2 points on the end. And I'm going to call the first point here R, and I'm going to call this point here S. Now, it kind of looks like the diameter, but I hope that you notice that it does not pass through the center. So what we're going to call here is RS with a line on top because it's a segment. We call this as a chord. And you can have infinitely many chords. This is a chord, this is a chord, or we can even say like this is a chord. Those are all chords because they connect one circle to the other side of the circle. That's what they do. Now, what I'm going to do here is going to kind of be similar, but not quite. I'm going to kind of go out here and add little arrows. And that changes what a chord is entirely. Because if I were to write RS with arrows on top, we actually call that is a secant. It cuts the circle, it cuts it into 2 points, as opposed to just a line segment that creates a line between one end of our circle to the other end. Now that we have all of these nice things here, I'm going to add a little bit more with the points that we already have. We don't need any more points. Another thing that you need to know is called an arc. And if you see here, from R to S here, we create some kind of arc. So we can say RS, RS. And because it's an arc, we're going to actually put a line like this over it. So you'll see that there's a difference between RS with the line over it, RS with these lines over it. It's very, very different. This here, RS is an arc. And we actually have several arcs. We have an arc here, we have an arc here, we have an arc here, we have an arc here. Those are all arcs. Also, especially a special arc would be if I were to go from A and go all the way around to C. That here, we're going to say A-R-C, because let's add all of them, spells arc, but it's actually a semicircle. It's a semicircle because it cuts the circle in half. It's an arc that is exactly half a circle. And I hope that you know that half a circle is 180 degrees. And that's pretty much it for these parts of a circle before we talk about other things on the inside of a circle. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch the page over here, and we're going to talk about other important things. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my center. Again, center is always very important. Usually it's always given to you. But what if I were to say draw something that looks like this, and I were to call this A and I were to call this B? If you know, or you can see that I've created something that looks like an angle, but it also touches the center, so it's very important. Angle APB we call central angle because it passes through the center, so central angle. So that's one example of an angle inside a circle. But what happens if we don't pass through the center? Is that even possible? What happens if I do something like this? Now, as you see, I've created two chords, and we'll pretend, since it wasn't very accurate, we'll pretend that they meet at this point here. We're going to call this point N. And let's call this M and O. So what you'll notice is I've created two chords, one chord and another chord here, and together they form an angle here. It doesn't pass through the center, but it does form an angle. So we can call angle M and O. It's actually an inscribed angle. And that's the case for any angle that's created inside a circle that does not stop or does not have a vertex. The corner of it is not at the center. But if the corner of the angle is at the center, we call that a central angle. One of the second to last things we're going to talk about in this lesson is parts, like the actual part of a circle. So what I'm going to do is I have a circle here. It doesn't really matter right now where my center is. But if I were to do something like this and ask you for, say, the area inside this here. This part of a circle, this area inside of a circle that is cut by a chord, this is a chord, cut by a chord, and this here is called an arc. We say that this is a segment. And if I have space over here, I'm going to just draw another circle here, and I'm actually going to draw this time the center, because there's going to be a difference if I were to take out like a really excellent slice of pizza here. So this should look very familiar to you. It looks like a central angle. It is technically a central angle. If we shade this in, because it's a part of the circle that is bounded by now radius, and an arc, we call this a sector. And the very, very last thing that we're going to talk about in this lesson is if I were to, and I'm going to try my very best, if I were to create two circles and both of them share the same center. Now I know that it looks a little off right now, but pretend like they both share the same center. We call these concentric circles. Which means that if I were to have two circles, one like this and one like this, they do not share the same center, whereas one is here and one is here. These are not concentric circles, but these ones are. And so just to recap, in this video you have learned all of the very major parts of a circle: the center, the radius, the diameter, the tangent, the chord, the secant, what an arc is, and what a semicircle is. We then talked about what a central angle is, where a vertex is at the center, versus an inscribed angle whose vertex is actually touching the edge of a circle. We also talked about the difference between a segment and a sector. Where a segment is bounded by a chord and an arc, a sector is bounded by two radii and an arc, and has a vertex at the center. And finally, we talked about concentric circles, two circles who share the same center. Therefore, these which do not share the same center are not concentric circles.